All right, music fans, welcome. Harmless Dave here on the Harmless Dave channel, talking about real music and doing it in real time for a few real people out here, just like you and just like me. So, Steve Smith, former Journey drummer, is talking about when Steve Perry fired him from the band. It's an issue now that's like 40 years old, but we're still talking about it because it was such a dramatic thing. Of course, if you've watched the VH1 documentary talking through the whole Journey fiasco, you find out that Steve Perry had to have that sound, whatever that sound was, more of an R&B sound. Um, Steve Smith maybe being a little too technical, a little too sophisticated, a little too jazzy for what Steve Perry wanted at the time. Um, Although he said, if I had a chance to do it all over again, I probably wouldn't have done that. But at the time he did it. In a new interview, um, Steve Smith opens up about what happened. And when he was fired, both he and Ross Valerie were fired prior to the Raised on Radio album in 1985. Um, and he was asked, "This must have been really hard for you," and he says it was. It was a hard transition because I was invested as being a member, being a band member. He says I wasn't a sideman. I was an equal member. So this is interesting. I didn't know some of this, what he's going to say. I didn't realize that he was still part of the official Journey Corporation. See, Journey got branded as corporate rock early on, and they really have lived up to that. Now, I like corporate rock, the style, the music, these bands who are branded as corporate rock tended to all have big hooks and great sound, and just overall were really good musicians. So when you hear corporate rock, it tends to get, a negative connotation. I don't know if it is, though. I think if you're a corporation, you start to behave like a corporation, and that's problematic. I mean, early on, these bands got together to make music. They were hoping for a record deal. They get the record deal, and then everything evolves and goes to places that nobody could have imagined. How many years later, people are fighting over the name, they're fighting over the trademark. And interestingly enough, the Journey corporate trademark at the time was Nightmare Incorporated. Whoever thought of that? I don't know. Maybe that was Herbie. I don't know. Sounds like something maybe Steve Perry would have thought up too, because maybe he just wasn't happy in the band and figured this is a nightmare. So we'll call it Nightmare Incorporated. Or it was tongue in cheek. Anyway, so both he and Ross Valerie left the group as touring members, but they retained their ownership of the Journey trademark. And this is what led to what happened in 2020. Steve Smith, of course, came back to Journey for a while after Dean Castronovo had to leave, and then now Dean is back in the band, which I think is pretty cool. But, Steve Smith was this really sophisticated drummer, and apparently this hit him really hard. He said it was more working through the legalities of not being a part of the touring aspect of the group. I did go to therapy, he says, to work it out, to really work out a lot of those feelings of how hard it was to be in the group at that time and how hard it was to leave. But for me, the music is most important. He continued, my identity and my direction, it wasn't connected to being the Journey drummer, being in Journey. It was definitely part of who I was during that time. But it wasn't the entirety of it. And I had all these other musical environments and bands that I was playing in, and that saved me in a way emotionally. I could go out and play with local jazz guys, from San Francisco or go out on tour eventually with a band called Steps Ahead. And really, my first step was going out and doing drum clinics. I had been asked to do clinics most of the time I was in Journey, but I didn't have time to do it. And so the first thing I did when I left was make myself available for drum clinics. I ended up doing lots of them in late 85 and then into 86, which is, in fact, what led me to be playing in drums in the band Steps Ahead. He goes on to say it was a difficult transitionary year, but I wasn't going to let it stop me or derail me from my idea of what I wanted to be as a musician. Now, Smith also talks about Journey's most productive period. He says, I have a perspective that bands have a creative arc, a beginning, middle, and end. And it's really natural for that creative period to, and Journey is a good example of it. I mean, right now, the main body of work that Journey created was during the time, let's say, from 77 to 85. And even now, that's the music the band plays live, even though they've continued to make albums. The music that stands the test of time was during that one period. And so a lot of bands have that creative arc, and it's totally natural for it to have a beginning, middle, and end. And really, one of the greatest examples is the Beatles. They didn't keep going and going. They went until they were done. And then the individual members went out there and did what they do. And he says, I feel like that is the next step. If you're an evolving musician, you have this experience in a group, and I learned a lot in that. It was like finishing school. It was like getting a PhD in the music business, but then afterwards, I wanted to continue and focus on doing my own thing. And it feels like a really healthy way to be in life and in music. Anyway, they go on here in this particular article to say Smith recently rejoined Journey in 2015. That was 10 years ago, folks, when he was asked to tour again with the band as a replacement for drummer Dean Castronovo. And of course, we know Steve Smith was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony in 2017. But in March of 2020, Sean and Kane filed a lawsuit against Smith and Valerie, who had been members of Journey on and off since the band formed in 1973, claiming the two attempted a coup in order to gain control of the Journey trademark. The suit, which sought more than $10 million in damages, accused Smith and Valerie of holding an improper shareholder and board of directors meeting back in February of 2020, during which they ousted Kane and Sean from leadership posts at Nightmare Productions under the incorrect assumption that the company held the rights to the Journey name. An answer filed by counsel defending Valerie against the complaint's allegations and the cross-complaint attempted to dispute and refute these allegations. In April of 2021, Sean and Kane reached an amicable settlement agreement with Smith and Valerie. Anyway, that's kind of like the Cliff Notes version of what was going on. Allegedly, people keep telling me Perry wasn't on the call, but allegedly, and I've heard this from a very inside place within the band Journey, that Steve Perry was on the call during that time frame where they were trying to seize control, best way to look at it, and oust Kane and Sean. I think the turning point with that is when Jonathan Kane began defending Neil Sean during that time frame, and then ironically later on, Kane and Sean would then have difficulties with credit cards and expenses and all kinds of other things, I guess. Chemistry. There's almost zero onstage chemistry. When you go see Journey these days, the onstage chemistry comes from Arnell and Dean, and I that's kind of it. There's not a lot of onstage chemistry, really. I mean, some of the support guys in the band, I mean, everybody does a good job, but it's just, it's a brand. and it continues, and people will pay big money to see them. They're not on tour this summer, which is interesting, but I hear maybe things will start to ramp up again. I don't have any inside track right now to anything, but that stuff about Steve Perry, I heard it from somebody who, I'll just say, they're in the band. So they're the ones that told me this. If they're lying to me, they're probably just trying to get information out there to make Steve Perry look bad. And I don't know. Perry said he wasn't involved. He said he had nothing to do with any of that. So you can believe that, or you can believe what I heard. I mean, does it really matter if Perry was involved or not? Um, I mean, he's always involved. He's always getting a little bit of money from whatever Journey does. So he made the best deal in the history of buyouts. Yeah, they bought him out, but he makes money to this day on everything they do. So that's why Steve Perry is kind of like the king of Journey and always will be. All right, so that's my video on Steve Smith. Great drummer. People forget about how good Steve Smith is, but people who drum for a living, they know. They're like, yeah, Steve Smith, he's a beast, and he does things that a lot of other drummers wish they could do. So, see you soon.